Hi everybody, and welcome to another Storytime with Sid. It is me, Sidney of Hightower, as it is every week, and here I am again with another story. Now, if you haven't watched the first part of this story, I highly recommend doing that, and I will link that below in the description. Oh, that's so weird. I sound like an official YouTuber. Oh, wow. But this is part 2 of the Ice Maiden, so if you haven't seen part 1, I highly recommend it before you watch this one, just so you get the breadth of the story. This is probably one of my favorite stories to date, just because of how cinematic it is, and I know that I said that before, but I just want to reiterate how much I really like this story, and I really want it to be turned into a movie. But anyway, I also wanted to update you a little bit on how the month of October is going. So, I love October in the mortal realm because of my favorite holiday of the mortals. It's Halloween. I love Halloween. I think it is so fun to dress up. And you know what Fae have the uncanny and wonderful ability to do is that we have glamours. So I can literally dress up into anything, anytime I want. Doesn't matter what I look like, it's still going to be me. But I can just put on a glamour to look like a vampire. Or put on a glamour to look like, a different kind of Fae. Or a troll, or a goblin, or whatever I want. I can put on a glamour. And I can do that really easily. You know the interesting thing about humans? They're really good at glamours too. In fact, most people walk around with glamours every day and don't even realize it, but we won't get into that right now. Right now, what we're gonna do is focus on the story at hand. Yes, because I only have a few of these left. So the month of October, what I'm going to do, because I love October and Halloween so much, is that I'm going to delve into some famous stories that are just a little bit spooky, and I think you'll recognize them. It's only going to be for the month of October, unless you guys want more. But in October, what we're going to do is tackle the Grimm's fairy tales. And I'll give you more information on that later. But for right now, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm just really excited. Right now, what we're going to do is dive into the Ice Maiden, part 2. Let's get started. Chapter 8. More news from the Parlor Cat. "Here's what you demanded," said Rudy, as he strode into the miller's house in Beck's and set a big basket on the floor and removed the cloth. 2 black-rimmed yellow eyes glared, flashing and wild, ready to scorch and clamp onto whatever they looked at. The short, strong beak opened to bite. The neck was red and down-covered. "The eaglet!" shouted the miller. Babette gave a shriek and jumped aside, but could not take her eyes off either Rudy or the eaglet. "You are not easily scared off," said the miller. "And you always keep your word," said Rudy. "Each person has his trademark." "But why didn't you break the neck?" asked the miller. "Because I was holding on tight," replied Rudy. "And I still am. I'm holding tight to Babette." "You'll have to wait until she's yours," said the miller, laughing, and Babette knew that was a good sign. "Let's take the eaglet out of the basket. What awful glaring eyes it has. How did you manage to capture it?" Then Rudy had to tell the story, and the miller looked at him with eyes that grew bigger and bigger. "With your courage and your good fortune, you could support 3 wives," said the miller. Thank you, cried Rudy. "Do you know the latest news at the mill?" the parlor cat asked the kitchen cat. "Rudy has brought us the eaglet, and is going to take Babette in exchange. They kissed each other and let her father see them do it. They're as good as engaged. The old man didn't kick. He pulled in his claws, took an afternoon nap, and let those 2 sit and gush. They have so much to talk about that they won't be finished by Christmas." And it's true that they didn't finish by Christmas time. The wind whirled the brown leaves, and the snow filled the valley with drifts as it did on the high peaks. The Ice Maiden sat in her proud palace, which grew bigger in the winter. The rock faces were covered with ice and icicles as thick as arms, as heavy as elephants, in the places where the mountain stream fluttered its veil of water in the summertime. Garlands of fantastic ice crystals shimmered above the snow-powdered spruce. The Ice Maiden rode on the howling wind across the deepest valleys. The blanket of snow spread all the way down to Beck's. She could go and see Rudy, who was indoors more often than usual, sitting with Babette. In the summer, they would be married. Their friends talked about them so much that their ears burned. The sun shone, the loveliest Alpine rose glowed. The lively, laughing Babette, who was as lovely as a spring that arrived, the spring that made all the birds sing of summer and of their wedding day. "How those two can sit and hang on to each other," said the Parlor Cat. "I'm sick and tired of all that meowing." Chapter 9. The Ice Maiden. Spring had unfurled its succulent green garland of walnut and chestnut trees that were most abundant from the bridge at St. Maurice to the shores of Lake Geneva along the Rhone, which with tremendous speed came rushing from its source beneath the green glacier, the Ice Palace, where the Ice Maiden lives. From there she let the fierce wind carry her up to the highest snowfields, and in the sharp sunlight she stretched out on the snowdrift cushions. There she sat, and fixed her piercing gaze on the deep valley below, where people were busily moving about like ants over sun-splotched stone. "Powers of reason, and as the children of sun call you," said the Ice Maiden. "Vermin is what you are. Just one tumbling snowball, and you and your houses and towns would be crushed and obliterated." And she lifted her proud head higher, and looked with deadly flashing eyes all around and far below. But from the valley came a rumbling sound, the shattering of rocks, human endeavors. Roads and tunnels were being constructed for the railroad. "They're pretending to be moles," she said. "They're digging passageways. That's why I can hear sounds like gunfire. But when I move my palaces, the roar is louder than crashing thunder." From the valley, a column of smoke rose up, moving forward like a fluttering veil. It was a drifting plume from the locomotive that was pulling a train along the newly opened railway, the undulating serpent whose joints were one car following another. Swiftly it sped forward. "They're pretending to be gods down there, those powers of reason," said the Ice Maiden. "But the forces of nature are still in control." And she laughed, she sang. Echoes filled the valley. "That was an avalanche falling," said the people below. But the sun's children sang even louder about human intelligence that prevails, that can harness the seas, move mountains, fill valleys. Human intelligence, which is master of the forces of nature. And that very moment a party of travelers came across a snowfield where the Ice Maiden sat. They had tied themselves together with ropes to form one great body on the slippery ice surface near the deep crevices. "Vermin," she said, "how can you be masters of the forces of nature?" And she turned away from them to cast a scornful glance at the valley far below, where a train was roaring past. "There they sit, all those ideas, but they're caught in the grip of nature. I can see every one of them. One sits as proud as a king all alone. Over there they're clustered together, and there, half of them are asleep. When the steam dragon comes to a halt, they climb out and go on their way. Ideas going out into the world." And she laughed. "That was another avalanche," said the people in the valley below. "It won't reach us," said two people inside the steam dragon. "Two souls and one mind, as the saying goes." They were Rudy and Babette, and the miller was with them too. "As baggage," he said. "I've come along as one of the necessities." "There they sit, those two," said the Ice Maiden. "Scores of chamois I have crushed. Millions of Alpine roses I have broken and shattered, with not a root remaining. I obliterate them all. Ideas! Power of reason!" And she laughed. "Yet another avalanche," they said down in the valley. Chapter 10. Babette's Godmother. Staying in Montreux, one of the nearby cities which, along with Clarens, Vernay, and Crin, forms a garland around the northeastern end of Lake Geneva, were Babette's godmother, the elegant English lady, and her daughters, along with a young relative. They had only recently arrived, but the miller had already paid them a visit, announced Babette's engagement, and told them about Rudy and the eaglet, about his visit to Interlaken. In short, the entire story. It had amused them greatly and favorably disposed them to Rudy and Babette, and to the miller as well. All three of them had now been invited, and so they went. Babette could see her godmother, and her godmother would see Babette. Near the little town of Villeneuve, at the tip of Lake Geneva, was a steamship in which half an hour's journey could reach Vernay, just below Montreux. This is a coast celebrated by poets. Here, under the walnut trees, near the deep blue-green lake, Byron sat and wrote his melodic verse about the prisoner in the gloomy Chateau de Chillon. There, where Clarens is reflected in the water along with the weeping willows, Rousseau wandered, dreaming of Valois. The Rhone River flows past beneath the towering snow-capped mountains of the Savoy, and not far from its source, in the lake, is a little island. In fact, it's so small that from the shore it looks like a boat. It's a rocky crag. 100 years ago, a lady ordered it to be walled with stone, covered with earth, and then had 3 acacia trees planted there that now cast shadows over the whole island. Babette was simply delighted by this little spot. It was her favorite place to go on the entire voyage. She said they could go there, must go there. Surely it would be incomparably lovely there, she thought. But the steamship continued past and pulled into harbor, as it should, at Vernay. The little group then set up upward, between the white sunlit walls that surrounded the vineyards outside the small mountain town of Montreux. There fig trees offer shade in front of the farmhouses, and laurels and cypress grow in the gardens. Halfway up stood the pension where Babette's godmother was staying. They were warmly received. Her godmother was a large, friendly woman with a round, smiling face. As a child, she must have looked like one of Raphael's cherubs, but now she had the face of an older angel with silvery white hair curling all around. Her daughters were graceful, elegant, tall, and slender. The young cousin, who was staying with them, was dressed in white form, head to toe, with golden hair and golden whiskers that were so plentiful they could have been divided among 3 gentlemen. He promptly devoted the utmost attention to little Babette. Lavishly bound books, sheet music, and drawings were spread across the big table. The balcony door stood open to the lovely expanse of the lake, which was so sparkling and still that the Savoy mountains with their villages, forests, and snowy peaks were reflected in it upside down. Rudy, who was usually so bold, lively, and undaunted, fell out of his element, as the expression goes. He walked about as if he were treading on peas across a slippery floor. How slowly the time passed. It was like a treadmill. And now they were going out for a stroll. That went just as slowly. Rudy would take 2 paces forward and 1 back to keep in step with the others. Down they went to Chillon, the gloomy old castle on the rocky island, to look at the torture stakes and dungeons, the rusty chains on the rock face, the stone benches for the condemned, the trap doors through which unfortunate prisoners were hurled below to land on iron spikes in the surf. That was what they called pleasurable sights. It was a place of execution, elevated through Byron's songs to the world of poetry. Rudy sensed only the execution site. He leaned over the big stone window ledges and looked down into the deep blue-green water and across the lonely little island were 3 acacia trees. That's where he yearned to be, away from all his chattering companions. But Babette was happy. She'd enjoyed herself immensely, she later said. The cousin, she thought, was quite perfect. Yes, a perfect gadabout, said Rudy. And that was the first time Rudy had ever said anything that hadn't pleased Babette. The Englishman had given her a little book as a souvenir of Chillon. It was Byron's poem, The Prisoner of Chillon, translated to French so that Babette could read it. It's all well and good with that book, said Rudy, but the fine-combed fellow who gave it to you was certainly not to my liking. He looked like a flour sack without any flour, said the miller, and laughed at his own wit. Rudy laughed too, and said that was very well put. Chapter 11. The Cousin. A couple of days later, when Rudy paid a call at the mill, he found the young Englishman visiting. Babette had just placed in front of him several poached trout that she had garnished with parsley to make them look even finer. That was quite unnecessary. What did the Englishman want? Why had he come? To be waited on and coddled by Babette? Rudy was jealous, and that amused Babette. It pleased her to see all sides of his heart, both the strong and the weak. Love was still a game, and she was playing with Rudy's whole heart. Yet it should be said that he was her joy, her heart's desire, the best and most splendid in the world. But the gloomier he looked, the more her eyes sparkled. She would gladly have kissed the blonde Englishman with the golden whiskers if it would have made Rudy dash away in fury, because it would show how much he loved her. That wasn't right, nor was it wise of little Babette, yet she was only 19 years old. She didn't think much about it. She gave even less thought to how her behavior might be viewed by the young Englishman as merrier and more light-hearted than was proper for the respectable newly engaged daughter of the miller. At the place where the main road from Bex passes beneath the snow-capped peak, which in the Swiss language is called Les Diablerets, the mill stood quite close to a rushing mountain stream that was pale gray, foaming with soapy water. The stream did not drive the mill. The great mill wheel was turned by a smaller stream gushing down the cliff on the other side of the river and through a stone culvert under the road, its force and speed lifting up to pour into an unclosed wooden basin, a wide flume across the racing river. The flume was filled with so much water that it overflowed, offering a wet, slippery path for anyone who might think of taking this route to reach the mill more quickly. That was exactly what the young man, the Englishman, had decided to do. White-clad like a mill worker, he climbed along it in the evening, guided by the light that was shining from Babette's room. He had never learned to climb, and he narrowly missed ending up head first in the stream, but he escaped with wet-sleeved and splashed trousers. Drenched in the muddy, he made his way to Babette's windows, where he clambered up the old linden tree, and there hooted like an owl. It was the only bird he could imitate. Babette heard him, and peeked out through the thin curtains, but when she saw the white-clad man and realized who she was, her little heart began pounding with fear, but also anger. Hastily she put out the light, made sure that the window hasps were fastened, and then left him to his hooting and howling. How terrible it would be if Rudy were at the mill. But Rudy was not there. No. It was much worse than that. He was standing right below. Loud and angry words were spoken, and a fight was about to ensue, maybe even a murder. Babette opened her window in terror, calling Rudy's name, telling him to leave. She couldn't bear for him to stay, she said. "You can't bear for me to stay?" he exclaimed. "So this was all arranged. You're expecting good friends better than me. Shame on you, Babette." "You're despicable," said Babette. "I hate you." And now she was weeping. "Go, go!" "I don't deserve this," he said, and he left. His cheeks were on fire. His heart was on fire. Babette threw herself across the bed and wept. "How I love you, Rudy, and yet you can think so badly of me." She was angry, very angry, and that was good for her because otherwise she would have been terribly sad. But now she could fall asleep in the refreshing slumber of youth. Chapter 12. Evil Forces. Rudy left Bex, walking toward home, heading up into the mountains in the fresh, cool air where the snow lay, where the Ice Maiden ruled. The leafy trees stood far below as if they were mere potato plants. The spruce trees and shrubbery became smaller, and Alpine roses grew along the snow that lay scattered in patches like linen spread out to bleach. There was a blue gentian growing there, and he crushed it with the butt of his rifle. Higher up, 2 chamois appeared. Rudy's eyes lit up. His thoughts took flight, but he wasn't close enough for a good shot. He climbed higher, where only scraggly grass grew between the boulders. The chamois walked calmly along the snowfield. He pushed on eagerly as the billowing fog sank down below him. And suddenly, he was standing before the sheer rock face. Rain began pouring down. He felt a burning thirst, heat in his head, cold in all his limbs. He reached for his hunter's flask, but it was empty. He hadn't given it a thought when he stormed up into the mountains. He had never been ill, but now he had a sense of what it must be like. He was tired. He felt the urge to throw himself to the ground and sleep, but water was streaming everywhere. He tried to pull himself together, but everything was shimmering strangely before his eyes. Suddenly, he saw what he had never seen before. A low hut, newly built, leaning against the rock face, and in the doorway stood a young girl. He thought she was the schoolmaster's Annette whom he had once kissed at a dance. But it was not Annette and yet she had seen her before, perhaps near Grindelwald that evening when he headed home from the shooting competition in Interlaken. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "I live here," she said. "I'm taking care of my flock." "Your flock? Where can it graze? There's nothing but snow and rocks here." "You seem to know all about it," she said and laughed. "Just beyond and a little below there's a lovely grassy pasture. That's where my goats are. I take good care of them, and I never lose a single one. What's mine is always mine." "How bold you are," said Rudy. "You are too," she replied. "If you have any milk, give me some. I'm unbearably thirsty." "I have something better than milk," she said, "and I'll give it to you. Yesterday some travelers came past with their guide. They left behind half a bottle of wine, better than any you've tasted. They won't be back for it, and I won't drink it. So you can have it." She brought out the wine, poured it into a wooden bowl, and handed it to Rudy. "That's good," he said. "I've never tasted wine so warm and so fiery." And his eyes shone. A liveliness, a glow came over him, as if all his sorrows and worries had evaporated. A sparkling, fresh sensation stirred inside him. "But you are the schoolmaster's Annette after all!" he exclaimed. "Give me a kiss!" "I will, if you give me the pretty ring that you're wearing on your finger." "My engagement ring?" "That's the one," said the girl, and she poured more wine into the bowl, then pressed it to his lips, and he drank. The joy of life coursed through his blood. The whole world was his, he thought. Why should he worry? Everything exists for our pleasure and happiness. The stream of life is the stream of joy. To be caught up in it, to be carried off by it, that is happiness. He looked at the girl, who was Annette, and yet not Annette. Nor was she the troll phantom that he had called the girl that he met near Grindelwald. This girl, here on the mountain, was as fresh as the new-fallen snow, as flourishing as Alpine rose, as nimble as a kid. Yet she was created from Adam's rib, as human as Rudy, and he flung his arms around her and gazed into her wondrously clear eyes. It was only for a second, and yet... "Yes. Explain, recount, tell us in words. Was it the life of the spirit or of death that filled him? Was he lifted up, or did he sink down into the deep, deadly ice abyss, deeper, ever deeper? He saw ice walls like blue-green glass. Bottomless chasms appeared all around, and water dripped like glockenspiel, so crystal clear, gleaming in the blue-white flames. The Ice Maiden gave him a kiss that froze right through his brow to his backbone. He screamed in pain, tore himself loose, toppled over, and fell. Everything turned to night right before his eyes, but he opened them again. Evil forces had made their play. Gone was the Alpine girl, gone the mysterious hut. Water was running down the bare rock face, snow lay around. Rudy was shivering with cold, drenched to the skin, and his ring was gone. The engagement ring that Babette had given him. His rifle lay in the snow at his feet. He picked it up and tried to shoot, but it misfired. Sodden clouds filled the crevasse like solid heaps of snow. Vertigo was sitting there, stalking her powerless prey, and from beneath her in the deep abyss came the sound of a boulder falling, crushing and tearing away everything that tried to break its fall. But at the mill, Babette sat and wept. Rudy had not come to visit her for 6 days now. He was the one in the wrong. He was the one who should ask her forgiveness, for she loved him with all her heart. Chapter 13. At the Miller's House. "What a terrible ruckus there is with those people," said the parlor cat to the kitchen cat. "Now everything has fallen apart again between Babette and Rudy. She's crying, and he probably hasn't even given her another thought." "I don't like that," said the kitchen cat. I don't either, said the Parlor Cat, but I'm not going to worry about it. Babette can go ahead and be sweethearts with Red Whiskers, although he hasn't been back either since he tried to climb onto the roof. Evil forces make their play both outside of us and within. That's what Rudy had recognized and now pondered. What exactly had happened around him and inside him high up on the mountain? Was it a vision or a feverish dream? Never before had he experienced fever or illness, but he had gained insight into himself as he reapproached Babette. He thought about the wild chase in his heart and the searing foam that had nearly broken loose inside. Could he confess everything to Babette? Every thought, which in that moment of temptation could have made him act. He had lost her ring, but with its loss, she had won him back. Would she confess to him? His heart felt as if it would split in half as he thought of her. So many memories rose up. He saw her before him, as large as life, laughing, a merry child. Many a loving word that she had spoken from the fullness of her heart flew like flashes of sunlight into his breast, and soon there was entire sun inside of him for Babette. Surely she would be able to confess to him, and she must. He went to the mill. There was a confession that began with a kiss and ended with Rudy as the sinner. His great error was in having doubted Babette's faithfulness, and it was quite despicable of him. Such suspicion, such ferocity could make them both unhappy. Yes, it could. And that's why Babette held a little sermon for him. It amused her and made her look so lovely. Yet on one point Rudy had been right. Her godmother's relative was a gadabout. She was going to burn the book he gave her and not keep anything at all that might remind her of him. Well, now that's over, said the Parlor Cat. Rudy is back. They've come to an understanding, and that's the greatest joy of all, they say. Last night, said the Kitchen Cat, I heard the rats say the greatest joy is eating tallow candles and having a good supply of rancid pork. So who should we believe, the rats or the sweethearts? None of them, said the Parlor Cat. That's always the surest course. The greatest joy for Rudy and Babette still lay ahead. The most beautiful of days, as it's called, was in the offing, their wedding day. But the wedding would not take place in the church in Beck's or the miller's house. Babette's godmother wanted to host the wedding celebration, and the marriage ceremony itself would be held in the beautiful little church in Montreux. The miller insisted that her request be honored, and he alone knew what the godmother had planned for the newlyweds. She was presenting them with a wedding gift that was certainly worth a minor concession. The date was set. The evening before, they would travel to Villeneuve, and then in the morning continue by ship as to arrive in Montreux, in time for the godmother's daughters to help with the bride dress. I suppose we'll at least have a celebration the day of the wedding, as, here in the home, said the Parlor Cat. Otherwise, I wouldn't even give a meow for the whole thing. There's going to be a feast, said the Kitchen Cat. Geese have been slaughtered, doves strangled, and a whole deer is hanging on the wall. My teeth itch at the mere sight of it. Tomorrow, they begin their journey. Yes, tomorrow! Tonight, Rudy and Babette sat in the mill for the last time as an engaged couple. Outside, the Alps glowed, the evening bells chimed, and the daughters of the sun sang, Whatever is best will happen. Chapter 14. Visions in the Night. The sun had gone down. The clouds were sinking over the valley of the Rhone between the towering mountains. The wind was blowing from the south, an African wind. Down over the high Alps came a foam that tore the clouds apart, and when the wind vanished, everything was quite still for a moment. The tattered clouds hung in fantastic shapes between the forest-covered slopes above the rushing Rhone River. They hung in shapes that looked like sea creatures from the primeval world, like hovering eagles from the sky, like leaping frogs from the swamp. They sank down to the surging current. They sailed along it, and yet were sailing in the air. The current carried with it a fir tree torn up by its roots, with the water making swirly eddies before it. That was Vertigo, with her sisters, spinning around in the rushing stream. The moon shone on the snowy peaks on the dark forest and the strange white clouds, night visions, spirits of the forces of nature. The mountain farmer saw them through his window pane. They were sailing below in hordes before the Ice Maiden. She had come up from her glacier palace and was sitting on the flimsy ship, an uprooted fir tree. The glacier water carried her along the river toward the open lake. "The wedding guests are arriving," the air and water whistled and sang. Visions outside, visions within. Babette had a peculiar dream. It seemed to her that she was married to Rudy, and had been for many years. He was now away hunting chamois, but she was at home, and sitting next to her was that young Englishman with the golden whiskers. His eyes were warm. His words were exerted a magical power. He held out his hand, and she had to follow him. They left the house, and kept going down, and Babette felt as if a burden were pressed to her heart, growing heavier and heavier. It was a sin against Rudy, a sin against God. Suddenly, she was all alone. Her clothes were ripped by thorns, her hair was gray. In great pain she looked upward, and on the mountain crest she spotted Rudy. She stretched out her arms to him, but didn't dare to call out or pray. And neither would have done any good, because she soon realized that it was not him at all, merely his hunting jacket, and hanging from an alpenstock, the kind that hunters set up to fool the chamois. And in the utmost pain Babette lamented, "Oh, if only I had died on my wedding day, my happiest day! Lord my God, that would have been merciful, my greatest joy! Then the best would have happened that could possibly happen for Rudy and me. No one knows the future." And in ungodly grief she threw herself into the deep mountain crevasse. A cord snapped. A funeral dirge sounded. Babette awoke. The dream was over and erased, although she knew that she had dreamed something terrible. She had dreamed about the young Englishman who she hadn't seen for months, hadn't given a thought. Was he in Montreux? Would she see him at the wedding? A tiny shadow slid across her delicate lips. Her brows knit together. But soon a smile and a sparkle returned to her eyes. The sun was shining so beautifully outside, and tomorrow was their wedding day, hers and Rudy's. He was already in the parlor when she came downstairs, and soon they were off to Villeneuve. Both of them were so happy, and the miller was too. He laughed and beamed at the best of moods. What a good father, an honest soul he was. "Now we're the masters of the house," said the parlor cat. Chapter 15. The Conclusion. It was not yet evening when the three joyous people reached Villeneuve and ate their supper. The miller sat in the armchair with his pipe and took a little nap. The young couple walked arm in arm through the town and out along the road beneath the cliffs covered with brush, along the deep blue lake. Gloomy Chillon, with its grey walls and heavy towers, was reflected in the clear water. The little island with the 3 acacias was even closer, looking like a bouquet on the lake. "It must be lovely out there," said Babette. Once again she had a greatest desire to go there, and her wish could be fulfilled at once. A boat floated near the shore. The rope attached to it was easy to untie. There was no one around to ask for permission, so they simply took the boat. Rudy knew how to row. The oars dipped like fish fins into the placid water, which was so supple and yet so strong, supporting like an entire back, swallowing like a huge mouth, gently smiling. Softness itself, and yet with a power terrifying and strong enough to destroy. A foaming wake appeared behind the boat, which in a few carried the pair over to the island where they stepped ashore. There was just enough room for the two of them to dance. Rudy swung Babette around 2 or 3 times, and then they sat down on the little bench under the drooping acacias. They gazed into each other's eyes and held each other's hands, and everything around them glittered in the glow of the sinking sun. The spruce forests on the mountains were tinged red-violet, just like flowering heather, and where the trees ended and the rock face emerged, the mountain glowed as if transparent. The clouds in the sky blazed like crimson fire. The whole lake was a fresh, blushing rose petal. As the showers climbed up, the snow-covered slopes of the Savoy, the mountains, turned blue-black, and the highest peak shone like red lava, displaying once again an instant from the creation of the mountains when these glowing masses rose up from the earth's womb, not yet extinguished. It was Alpine glow, the likes of which Rudy and Babette had never seen. The snow-covered dents du Midi shimmered like discs of the full moon as it rises on the horizon. So much loveliness, so much happiness, they both said. The earth has no more to give me, said Rudy. An evening hour like this is an entire lifetime. How often I felt happy the way I feel right now, and thought that if everything were to end right here, my life has been so happy. What a blessed world this is. And then the day would end, but another would begin, and I thought that day was even more beautiful. Our Lord is infinitely good to Babette. I'm so happy, she said. The earth has no more to give me, exclaimed Rudy, and the evening bells rang from the Savoy Mountains, from the Swiss mountains. Glowing like gold, the blue-black Jura rose up in the west. May God grant you all that is most splendid and best, exclaimed Babette. And so he will, said Rudy. Tomorrow will be mine. Tomorrow you will be all mine. My own lovely little wife. The boat! Cried Babette at the same instant. The boat which was to carry them back had come loose and drifted away from the island. I'll get it, said Rudy. He threw off his coat, tore off his boots, and jumped into the lake, and swam briskly toward the boat. Cold and deep was the clear, blue-green ice water from the mountain glacier. Rudy looked down into it. Just one brief glance, and he seemed to see a gold ring tumbling, gleaming, sparkling. He thought about his lost engagement ring, and the ring grew bigger, expanding into a glittering circle. The inside of it shone the clear glacier, infinitely deep chasms gaping all around, and the dripping water rang like a glockenspiel blazing with pale blue flames. In a mere second, he saw what will take us many long words to describe. Young hunters and young girls, men and women, who had once sunk into the glacier's crevasses, stood there, as large as life, with open eyes and smiling lips, and from far below came the echo of church bells from buried towns. The congregation knelt beneath the church dome, pieces of ice formed the organ pipes, the mountain stream played organ music. The Ice Maiden was sitting on the clear, transparent bottom. She rose up towards Rudy and kissed his feet. A deadly chill passed through his limbs, an electric shock, ice and fire. It was impossible to distinguish the difference in that brief touch. Mine! Mine! Echoed around him and inside him. I kissed you when you were little. I kissed you on the lips. Now I'm kissing you on your toe and on your heel. You're all mine. And he vanished in the clear blue water. Everything fell silent. The church bell stopped ringing, and the last notes faded with the glow on the red clouds. You're mine, echoed through the deep. You're mine, echoed on the heights from eternity. How lovely to fly from love to love, from earth to heaven. A chord snapped, a funeral dirge rang out. The icy kiss of death had conquered what was mortal. The prologue had ended, a life's drama could even begin. Discord had dissolved into harmony. Would you call this a sad story? Poor Babette, for it was her hour of agony. The boat drifted farther and farther away. No one on land knew that the bridal couple had gone to the little island. The evening wore on. The clouds descended and darkness came. Alone, in despair, wailing she stood there. A mighty storm hovered overhead. Lightning flashed above the Jura mountains, over Switzerland and over the Savoy. From all sides came flash after flash, thunder after thunder, rolling one peal after the other, lasting for minutes at a time. The lightning bolts were as bright as the sun. Every single vine could be seen as if it were noontime, and then everything was again pitch dark. The lightning formed ribbons, knots, zigzags, striking all around the lake, glittering from all sides, while the crashing thunder grew louder with the echoing roars. On land, they pulled the boats up onto shore. Every living thing sought shelter, and then the rain came pouring down. I wonder where Babette and Rudy are in this terrible storm, said the miller. Babette sat with her hands clasped, with her head bowed to her lap, mute from grieving, from screaming and wailing. In the deep water, she said to herself. Deep down, as if under the glacier, that's where he lies. Into her mind came thoughts of what Rudy had told her about his mother's death, about his rescue when he was brought up from the glacier's crevasse as a corpse. The Ice Maiden has taken him again. A lightning bolt flashed, as dazzling as sunlight on white snow. Babette sprang to her feet. The lake rose up suddenly, like a gleaming glacier. There stood the Ice Maiden, majestic, pale blue, shimmering, and at her feet lay Rudy's body. Mine! She cried, and then all around there were darkness and torrents of water. How ghastly! wailed Babette. But why should he die just as our day of happiness has arrived? Dear God, enlighten me! Enlighten my heart! I don't understand your ways! I'm lost in your power and wisdom! And God enlightened her heart. A glimmer of memory, a merciful ray. Her dream from the previous night, as large as life, flashed through her mind. She remembered the words she had spoken, her wish for the best for herself and for Rudy. Oh, was it the fruit of sin in my heart? Was my dream a future life whose cord had to be cut for my own salvation? How miserable I am! Wailing, she sat there in the dark night and the deep silence. She thought she could still hear Rudy's words, the last thing he had said. The earth has nothing more to give me. His words resounded with the fullness of joy repeated in the flood of grief. A couple of years have passed. The lake smiles, the shores smile, the vines are heavy with grapes. Steamships with fluttering flags are racing past. Pleasure boats with their billowing twin sails fly like the white butterflies across the mirrored surface. The railway above Chillon has opened, leading deep to the valley of the Rhone. At every station strangers disembark. They arrive with their red-bound guidebooks and read about the remarkable sights they will see. They visit Chillon. They notice out there, in the lake, the little island with the 3 acacias, and they read in their book about the bridal couple who in the year 1856 sailed over there one evening about the bridegroom's death, and not until the next morning did anyone on shore hear the bride's despairing screams. But the guidebook says nothing about Babette's quiet life with her father, not at the mill. Strangers live there now, but in the beautiful houses near the train station, where from the window on many an evening she still gazes out across the chestnut trees towards the snowy mountains where Rudy once scampered. In the evening hour, she sees the Alpine glow. The children of the sun settle up there and repeat the song about the wanderer whose cloak was torn away by the whirling wind and carried off. It took the mortal husk, but not the man. There is a rosy glow in the mountain snow. There is a rosy glow in every heart in which the thought resides. May God let the best befall us, but this is not the always revealed to us as it was for Babette in her dream. And that was the Ice Maiden. That was a very sad story, but it brought up some very interesting points about fate, and sometimes what seems to be the worst for people ends up being somehow the best. But I'm not sure. What do you think was the meaning of that story? What do you think was the moral? I think it had a lot of little morals in there that I think were very important and a lot of good lessons to learn. But what do you think was the overall moral? I'd love to hear about it. In the meantime, stay happy, healthy, and safe. Bye!